Hi everyone, George here, and welcome to the Art of Water. Today I'm going to talk to you about shrimp and the different varieties that are out there, ones that I have in my nano tanks, and some of the care and maintenance that goes into keeping good quality and healthy shrimp populations in your aquarium. As you can see here in this particular tank, this is a small 3.7 gallon nano tank. It is a product made by Petco called Imagitarium. Now, I'm not sure if it's specific to Petco or if other places you can purchase it at other places, pet stores, etc. But I made the purchase of these. I have a couple of these. I made the purchase of these several months back, and they've been established for quite a while. And I really wanted to talk to you about the shrimp population in here and sort of go over what some of the things that I have found that are required to keep these shrimp healthy and happy and that kind of thing. Number one, a safe environment for shrimp is one of the most important things that I think that you need to think about before you go out and purchase shrimp. Do you have a filtration system that is a good environment for shrimp, and is it a safe environment? Now, a lot of um, tanks do have a set on back filtration system that hangs on the back of the aquarium, and a lot of those, of course, have the hang down tube on them where they draw water into the system, filter it, and it flows back out in kind of a river kind of thing. And that's a very traditional sort of um, filtration system that would be most common. The biggest problem with those is the tube that comes down. A lot of times, shrimp get stuck in those, get sucked up into the system, and of course, they're killed by them. So, one of the things that you can do, of course, and I'm sure most of you know this who own shrimp, or if you don't, I'm going to tell you just because that's the point of the video, is to kind of explain some of the do's and don'ts. You might want to find a sponge sort of pull-up cover that goes over that filtration system. It does not impede the flow very much. There is a little bit of flow that's impeded, but it's not a huge problem. These are well thought out little sponges, and you can make your own, as a matter of fact, if you have sponge material. They're a little bit unsightly if you do it that way, but if you go out and purchase one, they're easily found at most pet stores, and they're made specifically to keep your shrimp and smaller fish safe from being sucked up into the filtration system. The other type of tank is something like this, where you have a background on the tank that is enclosed with your filter, your heater, and any other filtration matter such as rocks or ceramic, carbon, all different types, sponge, all different kinds of areas in the back of these that actually hide away everything so you can't see it. This is why I like this particular tank. Now, if you look at the grid on the back of this, I'm trying to get the best shot that I possibly can of this, but if you look at the grid on the back of this, you're going to see that the grid is very, very narrow, so these small fish and the shrimp cannot get sucked through there. Now, if your shrimp breed, which they are likely to do if you have shrimp in your tank and you have multiple shrimp, before you know it, you're going to end up with smaller shrimp that would not do well with a particular setup like this, because they would get sucked into that part of the tank on that grid and probably not be killed, but they would be definitely stuck in the backside of that. They probably have plenty to eat. There's probably plenty of algae and things like that that get pulled in through there, so they would survive. But that's not the ideal situation, obviously, for keeping shrimp. So my suggestion would be, if you have something like this, that you figure out a way to cover that grid with a strip of sponge. I have done this a couple of different times and it works out really well. But if you're not worried about that and you don't care about the shrimp breeding and just want the small shrimp to be food for your fish or whatever, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're trying to keep the shrimp that you're breeding or have bred in your tank, then you're going to want to do something like that to prevent any kind of problems with the shrimp being sucked up into that filter. And like I said, the best way to do that on a system like this would be to put a filtration sponge on that strip somehow. There's various different ways you could super glue it on. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it. As you know, there are super glues out there that are made specifically for aquarium use, and they work really well for doing that and keeping sponge or something like that stuck to that grid. Not a bad idea because it doesn't really impede much on your filtration and offers up that safety for new shrimp that might hatch out and become part of your system if you're trying to keep them, breed them, and maybe sell them back to your supplier or somebody else that might want them for their tank. Now, I have two different varieties, actually I have three different varieties of shrimp in this tank. And the first two at the bottom there are just your standard cherry shrimp. And those are the most common cherry shrimp that you can buy. Now, if I don't see one right now, I think there is one actually hanging out back in this area back here. A little bit harder to see at the top there. But that is actually a ruby red cherry shrimp, and they're much brighter, much more brilliant, much more beautiful in color, and those are one of my favorites. I think there's about 10, maybe 12 shrimp in this tank. Again, they're very elusive most of the time because this is such a well-planted tank and well-established tank that they've got all their little hiding spots, so you don't see them very often. Now, the second variety of shrimp that I have in here are called blue velvet, and the blue velvet shrimp are really pretty. They're also known as blueberry shrimp. They do go by several different names out there, but blue velvet seems to be the most common name that I've seen at my supplier or at pet stores that I do frequent, and they are quite beautiful. They can get to be, I would say up to 1.5 inches in size. Cherry shrimp, about 1 inch to 1.25 inches, and the ruby reds, same thing. Now I don't have, now there right there is one of the blue velvets that I was talking about. So that gives you some idea of what a blue velvet looks like. Most of you who have shrimp are going to know that anyway. This video is really just to talk about shrimp and some of the care and maintenance that you might want to do to make sure that your shrimp are healthy. Now, one of the problems that you have in a tank sometimes with a system that is not growing a lot of algae because you've got water parameters in really good shape, and also your lighting is perfect for the type of plants that you have in the tank. As you know, plants and algae will compete with each other, and if you have enough good planted material in your tank, your chances of getting algae go way down. So therefore, I just don't have algae issues in my tank at all. I rarely see any kind of algae. Every once in a while, I will see a little bit of the brown sort of surface algae on the glass or the back of the black part of this particular tank. But that typically, because of the autocinclids, doesn't last very long. But I do subsidize both the autocinclids and the shrimp with algae tabs, just because I want to make sure that they're being fed well enough to sustain them. And that's just really important, because shrimp and autocinclids both, if they don't have a good source of food, they won't last long in your tank. They will die off rather quickly. So let's talk about water parameters. Most shrimp will survive in any temperatures ranging from 75 to 82 degrees. Now this tank here, because it has a lid on it, a glass lid, which you can see up the top here, is running right around 80 degrees at all times, which makes this an ideal environment for the shrimp that I have in this tank, and the autocinclids, as well as the chili rasporas, which are the species that I keep in this particular tank. And if you look up any of these species that I'm talking about right here, these are ideal situations for the fish that I have in here, as well as the shrimp. Now these rasporas have been in here for quite a while. They were very immature when I got them. They're just starting to color up, as you can see. You can tell the difference between the males and the females because of the brightness of the males and the duller colors of the females. And I have a very good balance of those kind of fish in here. I think there's like 9 of them in this small tank. They're very tiny fish. They don't get any bigger than to a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Some of the females obviously will get a little bit bigger, but I don't have any problems with keeping these in here at all. They've been in here for a long time, ever since the tank was cycled, and this pretty much is a species tank, along with the shrimp that I keep in here, and a couple of autocinclids. Now you can see right here, this is a ruby red, and it's just beautifully colored. It's a vibrant red, which I find quite beautiful. There's several of those in here. This one here particularly came out right now, and I'm glad he did, because making this video, I was hoping that one of them would pop out. Now you notice the difference in the color between the ruby red and the just standard cherry shrimp at the bottom here. They're sort of working on an algae pellet that I put in there just to bring them out for this particular video. You'll also see that blue velvet is hanging around down there too. Earlier, when I first put the tab in there, you have to wait a little while for it to soften up. It brings them out. Most of the shrimp have kind of had their fill. I wish I had videoed this a little bit earlier, because when I started videoing, I noticed that most of the shrimp that were out had already had their fill and went back into their hiding spots. As far as pH goes, I keep this tank at around exactly 7 on the pH scale, and this seems to be fine for all varieties of shrimp. I've had candy cane shrimp in here. I've had several different varieties. I've had the black and whites, several different ones, and of course I move them around from tank to tank as I see fit to do that. One of the things that I get concerned about, and you might want to take into consideration as well, is the plants growing too tall and making it so that they have an area in which they can launch themselves up through this hole up here in the top of the tank, which I unfortunately have found just on a couple of occasions, not very often, but on a couple of occasions, I have found a shrimp laying out here or on the floor down below this tabled area that have died because they've gotten out of the tank and couldn't get back in. And so I try to keep all of the plants as best I can, cut to a certain height just so that that doesn't happen. The second thing that I would tell you to do to make sure that if you're putting floating plants in here, don't put so many in here that they get kind of dammed up and stay in one area. You want to make sure that they are floating around, because the shrimp will also attach themselves to this bottom rooted area here and ride along that, sometimes picking up some of the flake food that maybe you have fed your fish with earlier in the day. Just kind of an easy meal for them, and they can also get out of your tank that way as well. Also, you got to watch cords and other things on this particular aquarium. I do like the design because all the cords are beyond the light, and there is a wall there, and all the cords are beyond that, so there is nothing in the tank itself that allows for the shrimp to attach themselves to it and climb out and end up dead because they got out and were not able to get back into the water. So if anybody has any questions on shrimp or any other ideas that I might be interested in keeping shrimp, love to have you comment. Also, please don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up on the video. That really helps me and helps me to know who's watching and what interest they might have. Now, there's another ruby red right there that I see came out, and the other one is right up here. So they're out and about. If you stand here long enough, you can pretty much see just about every shrimp that's in the tank here if you wait it out long enough. But anyways, this is George with The Art of Water. Again, thank you for watching, and I really appreciate it. And again, if you would subscribe, make a comment, or give me a thumbs up, I'd sure appreciate it. We'll talk to you again.